Today, in Matthew's Gospel, Jesus is challenging us to think about the centerpiece of his teaching, the kingdom of heaven. The kingdom that is within us, among us, has always been, is now, and is to come. The kingdom of heaven is a challenging idea. Earthly kingdoms are rather easy to locate, both in time and space. They have clearly defined edges, even if they are fought over, and time spans. They have identifiable centers of power and recognizable ways of enforcing that power. They have leaders who we can see. I use the word challenging to describe the idea of the kingdom of heaven. This morning's collect, however, pulls no punches. It begins with the word scandalous. This is not scandalous as a juicy piece of news on the front page of a tabloid, but rather coming from the Greek skandalon, meaning a stumbling block. God, through Jesus, is wanting to startle us, stop us in our tracks, to consider the presence of the kingdom of God in our world and help us think about how we can embrace its reality, even if we can't see it or understand it. Believing what we can't see is always tricky. It takes imagination and practice. Think about how humans had to turn their brains inside out to replace their belief in the flat Earth with the reality of the round planet. Or that this round planet was actually travelling around the sun, rather than being the centre of the universe. We have the recent tragic example of the inability of so many people in this country to take seriously COVID-19. Pandemic? What pandemic? I can't see it. It's just a hoax, isn't it? Jesus wants to help us. And in this morning's Gospel passage, he gives us some comparisons. The kingdom of heaven is like a tiny mustard seed that can grow into a huge tree in which birds can take shelter. It's like a grain of yeast, so small, and yet with so much power to compel our bread to rise. That Jesus chooses the mustard seed and the yeast as examples is interesting. In first century Palestine, both were complicated. Yes, awesome in their power, but with questionable undertones. The mustard was the scourge of farmers with its potential for taking over their fields. Yeast, or leaven as it was known, was associated with sin numerous times in the Hebrew scriptures. If you remember the Pascha Nostrum text that begins, Christ our Passover is sacrificed for us, therefore let us keep the feast. It goes on to say, not with the old leaven, yeast, the leaven of malice and evil, but with the unleavened bread of sincerity and truth. Perhaps, though, it has less to do with mustard seeds and yeast, and more to do with the way we humans can leap to questionable judgments about things, people, big or small, whoever they are. We often overlook the small and pay attention to the voices shouting in the shallow end. Anyway, back to the idea of how something so small and seemingly insignificant can do and become so much. Isn't that the whole point of ideas? That they begin life in the nooks and crannies of our lives, and each has the potential to become huge. I think of the invention of Scotch tape, of the post-it note, the World Wide Web. I think of the opening of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, ba 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 ba. 3 repeated notes, dropping a major third to a fourth note. A tiny phrase, not unusual in any way, Beethoven's genius, they grew into an extraordinary musical composition that stopped the Western world in its tracks. I think of the Black Lives Matter movement that has swelled into being from small beginnings. I think particularly of the 2 high school students in Oakland who organised a march of over 15,000 protesting police violence on the Monday after the murder of George Floyd. What does an idea ask of us? It demands that we let go of our certainty, that we allow the provocation, and we let ourselves be brought up short. The earth is round. We must stand up for the equal rights and humanity of all people. Ideas demand that we imagine that an enormity is possible. We have so little real idea about what is going on in our world, and yet I think most of us have a sense that there is something much bigger happening than we have any way of understanding. And yet, even though we can't see it, we are always being invited to participate. The theologian Barbara Suchoki, in her book God's Presence, asks us to imagine a God of the universe like flowing water, in intimate relationship with all its elements throughout the universe, and therefore with all our earth as well. Imagine that God, in creative relation to the earth, woos the earth so that it becomes a world, and woos the world in the hope that it might yet become a peaceful and just reflection of the divine image. The kingdom of heaven is not just out there doing its own thing. The kingdom of heaven is before us, behind us, under our feet, within us, and over us. And yes, there is a song in that. There is no place that the kingdom of heaven is not. It invites, it woos us to open up to its enormous possibility, to allow in that seed, that grain, that acorn, because, as Julian of Norwich said so long ago, all things are possible with God. It's not just about us as individuals and our personal relationship with this God. We are not just individual drops of water splashing around. We are all in this divine river, this holy ocean of the universe. This is about us acting together so that the world might become a peaceful and just reflection of the divine image. Engaging in relationship with each other through God, recognizing our shared kinship. And in that word kinship, we find our treasure. Jesus is not talking about a kingdom with a king, but a kingdom of relationship. And that's not an original idea of mine, and I tried to find its origins, but Google failed me, having nothing to offer except a spelling correction, putting the G back in kingdom. Jesus tells us that just as the farmer with his discovery of the treasure in the field, and the merchant finding the pearl, when we catch a glimpse of this kingdom of heaven, we should give it our all without hesitation, engaging completely with its promise. Why? Because that's what really matters right now. And when the journey of life is at its end, the degree to which we have been able to engage with and for the kingdom of God is all that actually counts. The rest has no value. That kinship with the universe is what we take with us, leaving the dregs of useless doings and beings behind. To end with our collect for today. Scandalous God, sowing weeds among the crop, raising bread with impure yeast, offering treasure beyond price, casting a net that catches good and bad. Throw down our mean idols of purity and possession, and let the Son of Man show us your inclusive, provocative, wide-branching love. Through Jesus Christ, the stumbling block. Amen.